I am Emma. I am going to be your host for this evening, and don't panic, I'm going to move you straight on into your first keynote of the evening, which is Katie Womersley from Buffer, the VP of Engineering, and she will be talking about high-performance remote teams.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to CTO CraftCon. It is lovely to be here. And yes, as Emma shared, I am Katie Womersley, and I am the VP of Engineering at Buffer. Now, Buffer is a 100% remote team. We're distributed in about 21 countries, so we also deal with a lot of time zones. And I've also co-authored the Holloway's Guide to Remote Work, which you can find at the link over there. So I really do spend a lot of time thinking and writing and talking to other people about remote work, which has been very handy in this current pandemic situation where everyone's gone remote. I'll often share with other VP engineering, other CTOs, how to do remote work at all, teams sort of transitioning to remote work. And I'm realizing two things. My cat has decided to climb my tree, so I'll just pretend that's not happening. And the other thing I've realized is that during this pandemic, yes, everybody's suddenly remote, so it's not really a question anymore of how do we all do remote. We're all in this trial by fire, but how do we do it well? How do we make it work? How do we achieve high performance or our sort of baseline level of normal performance in this very strange remote setting that we've all just been thrown into? Now, one of the most important things that we're going to touch on, and it's already been shared in the keynote on psychological safety, which sounds amazing, you should definitely watch that, is the element of being in a virtual setting and how that affects your psychological safety. So, psychological safety, this is one of the key underpinnings of both a high performance team and a high morale team, because it is what allows people to take risks at work and to share ideas and to be fully engaged. So one of the most important things we as leaders are trying to figure out is how do we bring that baseline level of psychological safety to our teams to allow them to do their best work? And why is this particularly relevant today in a remote talk and when talking about performance? Well, in a remote setting, we're stripped out of a lot of the natural human connections that build psychological safety. And that makes it very difficult for CTOs like yourselves or other engineering leaders to build the kind of psychological safety that you normally would in the office. So at the very time you need it the most, it's the most difficult. Now, just to recap, psychological safety here, it's not about feeling comfortable or feeling like you enjoy your teammates. It's not a social thing. It's got a very specific meaning. So I've got the definition here. This was the first time it was shared in a journal on organizational science. So it is a shared belief held by members of the group that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So this means that it's not, I like all of the team members. It's totally possible to have a group where everybody likes everybody else. Everybody feels very happy with everybody else. Yet you feel like speaking about a subject on which you're not an expert is somehow risky, so you're not going to do it. Now, you want people to do this because you want to be able to have free-flowing communication, and it's one of the top drivers of performance. Google, in figuring out what made for a high-performing team, they found that their number one attribute there was teams that had high levels of psychological safety. So we know that in order to make our teams high performance, we need to make them psychologically safe. But we're in an environment now, owing to this pandemic, where we're so remote and it's much more difficult to achieve that same level of psychological safety when you're not in person. And in case you think I'm just making it up with the remote situation and teams feeling less safe, the Harvard Business Review did a bunch of lovely research in May of this year on the pandemic, and they found that a large number of managers, so in this case, it's anyone who is in any way a supervisor. So this definitely includes your tech leads, your senior engineers, if they have project management or any kind of classic supervisory responsibility. A large number of these folks are struggling with managing people working from home. They don't have the tools to manage a remote worker. So what they're doing is essentially micromanaging them. They're essentially becoming bad managers. And the result of that is a large number of workers during this work from home remote pandemic situation are feeling untrusted and they're feeling micromanaged. Got a little bit of the data here. So we can see that the number of people who feel good about their managers is not great. We've got 3 bars here, which is, not good to very bad. And it's the same for how confident managers feel about their abilities here and how workers are feeling about being managed. And I'm using the word workers because this study it's very broad. It goes beyond just tech, but it absolutely includes tech as well. And here we have the same data again. So in the situation where we've had this pandemic, we've all gone remote, and now it seems like the data is saying we're micromanaging. So some of us must be, because the data doesn't lie. The first thing to do as a CTO listening to this presentation is to check in with yourself. I know there's a temptation when reading this data to think, oh my gosh, it's managers micromanaging. And the instinct then is to micromanage your line managers or your tech leads to stop them from micromanaging. So the first thing to do is to check yourself and make sure that when you are engaging with your team, whether that's an engineer, whether that's a manager, and in fact, particularly if that's a manager, these are people who are feeling out of their depth. These are people that are really struggling with the organizational context, with the global context. It's very difficult for them to create a high-performance team in this remote setting. So as a manager, we want to really make sure that you are not starting this culture from the top inadvertently by, for lack of a better word, panicking about this micromanaging phenomenon and then reacting in a way that is perhaps too involved. The natural question there is, well, if I'm saying check yourself and don't micromanage, well, what is one to do? So the most important thing you can do as a leader here is to create a sense of predictability for your team. This is one of the underpinnings of a sense of psychological safety. If we're unable to predict our environment, as humans, that triggers the amygdala to be a lot more active. The amygdala being the lizard brain, part of the brainstem that basically tells you how likely you are to die in the next sort of 30 seconds. So in an environment where we don't have a sense of predictability and we can't have this idea of what our future holds, which during this pandemic is definitely the case in many situations for many of us, the amygdala is a lot more triggered, and so people have baseline low levels of psychological safety. They are not willing to take risks. They are not willing to share ideas in a team. They don't know what's going on, and everything feels very chaotic. And I mean, frankly, your organization probably is a lot more chaotic at this point in time. Buffer's been remote since day one. We've just had our 10-year work anniversary of the company's existence, and it's felt very chaotic this year. So all I can say is if this sort of like remote from day one company has felt more chaotic, everyone is going to feel chaotic. There are things you can do about it. So goal setting is very helpful. So here I've said clear binary goals. And what I mean by a binary goal is a goal that it's very obvious whether or not you're going to achieve it. So it's the kind of goal that you can score with a 0 or a 1. This is not a great time to have very vague aspirational goals where you're not really sure if you made progress towards that goal or not. So things like reduce our tech debt. Well, that's not really a binary goal. You can't say it's like reduced or not. It's like, well, by how much? What exactly do you mean by that? Whereas if you were to say, well, we need this team to get test coverage up to 80%, well, you can be very sure what it is. And you want this to be really clear because you want to give the team a sense of predictability. They need to know what is important and also what's not, as opposed to setting fuzzy, half-shaped goals. That's going to foster the sense of chaos. So you want the goal to be really clear. It also means that in any kind of team setting, you can point to your goals and you can share with your team how their ideas may or may not contribute to those goals. And it creates a nice sense of being part of something that matters. And right now, that's very important. You also want to make sure that your goals have short time frames, so probably shorter time frames than you usually would. Maybe you usually do year-long objectives and key results, and you have a key result for a year, this might be a great time in order to create a greater sense of predictability, to split those goals down to be a lot shorter. Maybe you'll have quarterly sort of key results. If you already have quarterly, perhaps you can go to monthly. I've had the unusual for buffer experience of changing a couple teams now to doing daily stand-ups. We're very asynchronous. We have different time zones. So it's a little bit hard for us to do stand-ups. And the reason we're doing it is because we want to build this sense of really short time frames, and we're just going to break things down into baby steps. It sounds cheesy, but it helps the sense of predictability. Predictability helps psychological safety. Psychological safety, number one for performance. And then a note here on your speed versus your velocity towards your goals. So speed is your, I'm going to say, ops pace. It's your rate of operations. It's how fast your team does things. Velocity is their movement in a certain direction. It's the vector. So for some teams, it literally is speed that matters. You just want them to do things quickly. Startups would come to for example, or if you have a team that's working on a new product line, what matters most is that they're iterating quickly towards something. And if they're going in circles, that's fine, as long as they're learning. For other teams, going quickly in circles is really unhelpful. And what you want to be doing is measuring their progress in a certain direction towards that clear 0-1 goal in a short-ish time frame. You want to know, are we getting there? And you want to clarify to this to your team, because again, what are you trying to do here? You're trying to create a sense of predictability around your goals. You want your team to know, do we need to just go fast, or do we need to progress in this direction? And then on this goal setting, so you've set your clear goals. They're very specific on their time frame. You know whether it's important that you're moving quickly in the cases of learning objectives, or if it's velocity that makes sense in the case of more committed objectives. Now, what do you do to avoid micromanaging this whole process? Well, you want to give your team autonomy, but with high levels of communication. So this is the mistake that our managers that were struggling in the Harvard Business Review survey were making. They were giving a lot of communication with very low autonomy. This constant ping on Slack. Hi, just checking. How's it going? Have you done the thing? Not yet. It's half an hour later. Don't do that. So you want to have a high amount of communication, but make sure that you're still creating high levels of autonomy. So the classic here, give a lot of autonomy on how people achieve these goals, and don't abandon them. You can keep checking in. How are they feeling? Are the goals clear? Do the time frames make sense? How do they feel about their speed/velocity? So communicate a lot, check in, provide support and guidance, but make sure that you're leaving room for that autonomy. All right. And as we saw from the data, our line managers need help. Now, this is typically our engineering managers, but I want to be really clear that this definitely covers anyone in a tech lead role. This would cover senior engineers if they are in any kind of project management role. They are coming under unusual amounts of strain in this situation with the pandemic, and it's making it very difficult to build psychological safety. That makes it very difficult for them to have a high performance team in this setting, this remote setting. So these people, I've said here, engineering managers, includes tech leads, includes our senior engineers in some cases, they end up being the frontline workers of mental health. And this is a really difficult position for a manager to be in, because they're typically tasked with achieving these outcomes. We set the goals, we do the OKRs, and they've got the clear timeframes, and everything makes sense. And then they get into a one-to-one, and they're providing autonomy, and there's high communication, and they ask, how are you? And the person just completely breaks down. And it turns out that they're incredibly depressed, and they're hard to even get out of bed, and they're just feeling this overwhelming sense of doom. And this manager is there completely unequipped, and they might be dealing with their own issues around mental health. And we know that the pandemic has triggered a mental health pandemic in many countries as well. So what can you do to support leaders that are in this position of being these frontline, these sudden untrained frontline workers of a mental health crisis on your team? Well, something I do that works really well is every week I get all line managers or anyone who's in this situation. I get them together. We have what do you call a huddle, and we do something called real life manager. And what this is some person on the team, the management team here, will share a situation that they've experienced or that they anticipate that they need help with. And the whole group will discuss it and they'll brainstorm how to approach it. We'll talk about things like, how do you give performance feedback that you need to give to somebody who's feeling very anxious, who has a lot of anxiety? And by doing this as a group, we're able to make sure people don't feel like it's just them alone. And we're able to share learnings much, much more quickly. So your managers are then able to learn from not just their own experiences in the situation, but from all the other managers on your team as well. And it helps build that sense of support. This is another case of it's high communication, but it maintains their autonomy. You're not DMing them what to tell their direct report. You're providing a nice supportive forum for them to figure it out. As the CTO, as the VP engineering, as the head of engineering, whatever you are listening to this conference talk, what is it that you're going to do to support your line managers, tech leads, etc.? Well, you need to check in, and to be clear, you want to offer 3 things in your check-in. You want to offer information, you want to offer guidance, and you want to offer support. And that can be emotional support, that can be resources. Maybe you're going to give them additional headcount. Maybe you're going to give them access to coaching. So you want to offer these things. Information, here's the context that you need. Guidance, this is training. This is what you would do in that situation. It's absolutely okay to offer advice. But when you do so, make sure that you're clear about it being advice and say, is this a great time for me to offer you advice? Or do you want to figure it out by yourself? Another great trick is explicitly ask people, do you want me to coach you through this right now by asking a lot of open-ended questions? Or are you looking for me to give you my advice of what I would do if I were you? And give them that option. Don't just stick with the Socratic method because you want to grow them as leaders. It might not be the time. It's definitely okay to say, do you want my advice? And then just tell them, well, if I were you, I would do this. You can still coach them later as well. And then, of course, if you don't do skip level one-to-ones, you should probably start doing skip level one-to-ones as much as you possibly can get around to doing them. They can be just 25 minutes. I do them about every 6 to 8 weeks, which is on the high side, but it's really helpful for helping your line managers feel like you have a sense of how their team is feeling so you can help them with their mental health crises or whatever it is that they're needing to deal with. And now, I touched on this a little bit earlier around how do you give somebody feedback when there is anxiety around that, or how do we have a high performance team when we're in this tough time of the pandemic, when we're all remote, and how do we build psychological safety? And what I've seen people do is completely the wrong thing to do. What I've seen people do is say, oh, it's a pandemic, we're all remote, we're not set up for remote, this is a very difficult time, so yeah, it's completely unacceptable, what Barbara just shipped, but I'm not going to mention it to her because it's not a great time. I know that this is, really challenging. And that's not great for building psychological safety. People need to have clarity. They need to have radical candor. And that means not just saying, oh, you're great, you're great, you're great, when they're messing up, because people are usually fairly self-aware and they know they're messing up. Doesn't mean you have to be mean, not at all, but it does mean you need to give feedback when it's merited. And what I mean by this is you want to give timely, specific, and actionable feedback. So not, Barbara, you're messing up, that would be a disaster. You want to say, I noticed that last PR, and I noticed that, you merged and the build hasn't passed, and that's unusual for you. Can you tell me a little bit what's going on there, and have that conversation? Maybe there's something you can support and help with. Maybe there was a lack of understanding. Oh, we just need to merge things as fast as possible, even under really very risky situations, and you need to clarify that was not actually the goal. And then the other thing is, in your remote context, you want to make sure that that feedback is also documented, not because of building a paper trail, but because clear is kind. And sometimes if you're not used to giving feedback over video call or in a remote setting, you don't have your normal social connection, somebody might not realize what it is that you're saying. And so you want to provide multiple ways for them to receive the same information. So you might have a call, you might talk to them through it, and then you might follow up with a light touch and just say in a different format, in a written format, thank you so much for talking to me about that PR that got merged when the Bill didn't pass. I really hear you on the amount of time pressure you felt from product, and we're going to work on that together. Thanks again. It doesn't have to be a whole like documenting our, process. And that helps people feel like, well, they know where they stand, they know what's going to happen. And so they have a sense of trust and safety that when they're not hearing from you about things they could do differently, that things are okay. The classic mistake people make, specifically with anxious teammates, which is many teammates right now, is they think anxious people can't hear feedback. And so you should never give an anxious person any feedback. And in fact, it's completely the opposite. As a fairly anxious person myself, the act of receiving feedback is not nearly as bad as the constant terror that you find yourself in moment to moment, just knowing that somebody is about to tell you something horrendous. When somebody says, something clear and specific and it's fairly actionable, it's actually fairly okay. And it helps build a sense of feedback's not that bad. It's not something that you need to be afraid of. People are going to be candid here and things are okay. Anxiety tends to be much worse when it's the fear of the unknown. People don't know what you think of them and they don't know if they're okay or if they're not okay. So specifically in the case of anxiety or in the case of mental health challenges, it's even more true that clear is kind. And on that topic, performance reviews, you should do them, even in this case of the pandemic. Why? Because it helps people have a sense of normality. It helps with a sense of predictability. Now, you might not want to give somebody a negative review on their performance if they are at home homeschooling their 2 children while trying to keep their dog silent so that they can be on the Zoom call. Yeah, of course. What you want to do then is not avoid the performance review. What you want to do is adjust the expectations. You want to say, this is the situation, these are the expectations, they're very different. And so somebody can still absolutely meet or even exceed your expectations in this different circumstance, and you're really clear that they're lower expectations. You can say, look, back at the office, in the normal 9 to 5, when the kids were at school, all the rest, was going to be a really different review. You would have achieved this project much, much faster. I think given the circumstances, I don't expect that. That wasn't the expectation. You have so far completely met my expectations, which are now different. And that's a very helpful touch point to give people. And of course, there is still the case of parting ways. And that is still true even in a situation where it's very unusual with the pandemic. So you might have people on the team where it's been going on for a while. You know it when it's starting to impact the rest of the team. And this is a really difficult case to do. But remember here, it's going to be really difficult for your managers to navigate this on your own. So if there are cases of underperformance where it starts to look like parting ways could be a possibility, that's a really great time to check in with whoever that line manager is, check in with that person a lot, make sure that you're doing everything you can in the cases of fostering psychological safety, providing clear goals, providing autonomy with support and guidance. And if it comes to the point where you need to let somebody go, in order to have a high-performing team, you're going to have to just do it. And I feel like it is okay to do that. The reason being, not everybody is going to be a fit for your team. And that is still true today, even in these difficult circumstances. But of course, I don't include here people that have always been superstars, very high performers, and are struggling as a result of a pandemic. If that's the case, no, that shouldn't be parting ways. That should be a conversation around changing your expectations, changing your goals, figuring out how to support that person. All right. And now, bonding in the time of COVID. So this is really on reflection. Perhaps I could have even put this section first, but this is really the trick with psychological safety. Now, we want people to feel that it's safe to take interpersonal risks in front of the group. And we know this is very important to high performance in a team. And we also know that people feel safe in front of the group when they feel bonded as a group. But how do we do that? Because it's not easy right now. Some of the challenges we have is Zoom fatigue. We're trying to have, fun Zoom calls and we, this is the most awful idea that I managed to have. What about some kind of pajama party on Zoom? It was met with the stoniest gaze I have ever seen from an engineering manager. And I feel like I need to share that I have horrendous ideas as well. And I try to weed out the bad ones and only share the good ones. But Zoom fatigue is a real problem. So the sort of go-to here, well, we can't meet in person, so let's do everything we would have done in person. Let's do it over Zoom. As you've probably found out for yourselves right now, it's not really working because it's so exhausting. I just can't face the idea of yet another Zoom happy hour. I have to Zoom my parents. I have to, do my fitness on Zoom. So we want to, as leaders, figure out ways to actually bond that's not going to trigger that Zoom fatigue. And one of the things that has worked pretty well is doing video games instead, because it's genuinely fun. You're not trying to force people onto a video call and say, bond, have fun. Among Us, the video game where one person is an imposter and then everybody else is trying to figure out who's the imposter. This has been used very effectively on my team, on other teams. It's been used by a US Senator, AOC in getting people to engage with the campaign back in the US, and very, very popular, most ever watched Twitch live stream. So a really lovely idea. We've also done Animal Crossing, which of course you might not have the gear for that, but I've gone to teammates' little virtual islands and had virtual one-to-ones, and it felt surprisingly real. It felt like an alternative world in which we could find each other and actually find the online versions of ourselves. It was very interesting. So if you haven't tried that, I really do recommend it. And then casual quick calls are still great. So you can have your team do little catch-ups on specific work topics, suggest that two people might pair code on some bug together, or have a quick chat when you might have a Slack message or something. Make it a very quick 5-minute Zoom call. Those little calls are short enough that they don't trigger Zoom fatigue. It's not like, now I have to sit here for an hour pretending to be interested and pretending to have fun. It's very quick. You're answering a specific question. It's work related, and it gives a little bit more human interaction. So lean into those casual quick calls. There are also some things you can do here with your work Slack channel, whatever group chat you use. So we use channels around bonding, around self-care. We have a gratitude channel where people are constantly sharing gratitude for their teammates. So, and that is really lovely to build that sense of it's safe to take risks in front of the group, because you know that there's a sense of appreciation, there's a sense of gratitude. And if you can have people share gratitude for people taking risks, that would be wonderful. We also have a self-care channel to talk about all the challenges we're facing. It's like everyone's struggling with some element of mental health, with loneliness, with being locked down or feeling frazzled. And it does a lot if you have a self-care channel or a mental health channel to try to destigmatize that. And as a leader, you can start by doing that from the top. You can say, oh, this is what I did to take care of my mental health today. And that's a wonderful thing to say. We also have local area channels that might not be applicable for your team, but if it is, it's a lovely way to build a bit of a sense of real world offline connection if it's relevant for you. And then we have this integration called Hey Taco, where you can give people little taco emojis, and then these taco emojis can be redeemed for actual stuff. And people do it whenever somebody does something nice. So you might say, oh, at Peter, here's a little taco. Thanks so much for sending me those docs that I was looking for. And it kind of just builds up a little bit more of a sense of quick, positive, easy interactions. And that's a very easy thing to do. And then, of course, we also have events like book clubs where people are discussing a book that they're all reading together. We have movie exchanges where folks will work through, you're watching a movie together, or they'll be watching the same series and they can talk about that. And we also have this fun little club. It's like pen pals, and you sign up on a spreadsheet to send coffee or tea to other members of the team, and then you receive a package of coffee or tea. So it's a bit like a Secret Santa, and you'll post off, maybe this month I'll be posting it off to Eric, and then I'll be receiving a packet of tea from Andy or something like that. And it's just really lovely to be receiving physical, tangible things at this time when everything feels so virtual. So that's a nice thing that we've done, and it helps to have that sense of team cohesion and team bonding. That helps to promote the psychological safety, and that helps to create the high performance that we're trying to achieve. And I'm going to leave you with this quote from Frank Herbert, who's probably one of my favorite authors. If you show me a completely smooth operation, I'll show you someone who's covering mistakes, and real boats rock. And I love that because, to be very frank, this is a very rocky boat. My boat feels very rocky. I'm not sure about yours. But, we want to be upfront about that and help each other and learn from each other. And it's also applicable on your sort of sub-teams as well. If you have one engineering manager where everything is just incredibly smooth, that might be the person that you might want to check in with first. And remember, we're offering guidance and information and support, not micromanaging. So I would say perhaps start with the smoothest boat and see what happens. Alrighty. It's been such a pleasure talking with you all today, and I know that we're all in the Slack channel so we can continue the conversation. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Katie_Wommers. I really enjoy connecting with other leaders, helping out any way I can. You also, no one ever does this, but you can email me. My email is right there. And if you have any question or something you're trying, please shoot me a line. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Thank you so much.